Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Small Publisher Month continues here at the Gaming Gang, as today I'll bring you my review of the Era Survival Core Rulebook from Shades of Vengeance. This is written by Ed Jowett with Jennifer Martin. Artwork is provided by Ed Jowett and Mikhail Gruley. I apologize, I'm sure I've mispronounced at least one of those names. Now, there is a 312-page definitive edition of Era Survival. It is available as a hardcover. It carries an MSRP of $74.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at the era-games.com website for $19.99. Now, you might be wondering, hey, Jeff didn't mention Drive-Thru RPG. I guess this isn't available in PDF there. Well, the definitive edition is available at Drive-Thru RPG, but it's $10 more there than if you go to Era Games. So that's why I mentioned era-games.com. All right, all that said, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got the core rulebook for Era Survival. A few things I want to mention. First of all, the fine folks over at Shades of Vengeance reached out to me asking if I'd be interested in reviewing any of their games. And of course, I said, yeah, sure, of course. So after a bit of back and forth, they did offer me Era Survival, which is a post-apocalyptic horror survival role-playing game. I did receive this review copy, compliments of Shades of Vengeance, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. And of course, it's always important you know that. I'm also not going to look at each and every page of this book, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what you're going to find inside Era Survival. Lastly, I do want to mention, I don't even know if this book is still on sale, because this is the core rule book. This is not the definitive edition. So this clocks in at about 82, 84 pages less than the definitive edition. And I'll be very honest, I don't know what the definitive edition contains that this core rulebook does not. So please keep that in mind, that I am essentially reviewing Era Survival, not necessarily this book or the definitive edition, because there could be some huge changes with the definitive edition. I gotta be honest, I don't know why I received this book as opposed to the definitive edition. But regardless, let's jump on in. First thing I want to do is share credit where credit is due. So these are the folks that worked on Era Survival. Now, as far as production quality, the paper stock, very nice. It's got a matte finish to it. It's got a nice thickness to it as well. I will mention this sort of has a print-on-demand feel to it. I don't know if this book was print-on-demand, but it does kind of feel like some print-on-demand books that I've reviewed in the past. Now, also should point out, the way this book is laid out, Game Master is going to be flipping back and forth through this a lot. This might get dinged up because, of course, it is a soft cover and the binding might take some abuse with that. As far as the artwork throughout, pretty solid. There are a few pieces in here I was kind of like, eh. But then there were other pieces I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's really nice. It's really cool. So let's talk about the premise of Era Survival. Once again, this is a horror survival role-playing game. This is set in a post-apocalyptic world. It is called Gaia. My assumption is it's Earth, because all the gear and equipment is just our modern era gear and equipment. I think because this parasitic outbreak took place 100 years in the past, I think it's just the people have come to call Earth Gaia. This is not your typical zombie apocalypse role-playing game, because for one, we do have shamblers who are kind of like zombies. They were infected by the parasite and died, but they are animated by the parasite. But we also have other creatures out there who have mutated. So very interesting setting. I really like the background. I love the fact that we have all these different factions. And all these factions are very unique. We get information about how they were founded, their history, what their leadership looks like, the sorts of people who belong to those factions, what kind of relationships they have with other factions. Of course, some they're openly hostile to, others they might be aligned with. There are some factions that it's pretty much them against everybody. Really like that a lot. And I think it really brings this setting to life. We'll also get into different locations. We have different kinds of zones. So we have high zones, which are very, very dangerous. Very likely that someone will come down with the parasitic infection. And then, of course, we get into very rare clean zones where there's actually no evidence of the infection to be found. Now, there is no cure. So this is a bleak future for Gaia. There is an injection that people can take, which will, if they've been infected, it will kind of keep the infection dormant, but there is no cure. So this is a pretty bleak setting. Although it's not sort of the grim dark where it's like, oh, well, we're all doomed. No, people are still trying to survive. And like most post-apocalyptic role-playing games. Now, we do get into a section which has a lot, and I repeat, a lot of fiction, which if you follow the Gaming Gang, you know I'm not a huge fan of a lot of fiction in my role-playing game releases. I don't mind it a ton if it's kind of kept in line. I got to say, there is a lot of page space devoted to fiction of this setting and the various different factions. I have to say, though, it's not terrible. It's not like some of the god-awful fiction I have seen in some role-playing games that I have reviewed. But the reality is, I would have preferred to have seen this information presented as a gazetteer. For one, because it's so much easier for a game master to parse this information, background about the setting, about the factions, in a gazetteer, as opposed to having to find where was that bit of fiction that talked about XYZ. As you can see, all of that I was just flipping through is all fiction. And I got to say, I really do ding the review score for Era Survival's core rulebook. Once again, I don't know what the definitive edition might hold, but I do ding it because of so much of the page space devoted to the fiction, where we should have gotten stat blocks and gazetteer information. Next up, we're going to start getting into character creation. Got to say, interestingly enough, that the actual mechanics to Era are still a couple of sections away. So we get into character creation without really knowing how the Era mechanics work, which I thought was a little strange. So as far as creating your character, players are going to choose from a background. We don't have classes. We do have levels. So the player characters will level up, but we don't have classes per se. So we are going to have karma. I gotta be honest, I'm not real big on this mechanic. I would probably drop it if I were running Era Survival. And I have to say, this is relatively modular, so I don't see a huge issue if I were to drop this. The way karma works is not necessarily if you're good or evil. It's what effect do your actions have on other people. So we have champions, hero, equalizer, renegade, and villain. Yeah, like I said, I would probably drop this and let my player characters engage in whatever shades of gray they want. We also have quirks and hobbies. So the player will get to choose a quirk and a hobby for their character. And of course, obviously enough, They can work together with their game master to come up with new quirks and hobbies. Strangely enough, a quirk in Era Survival is a flaw. It's a fault. That's really not a quirk, though. Quirks tend to be something unusual or something that makes someone stand out from someone else. Someone who's quirky, that's not used as a negative description. So I thought it was weird that it's a quirk. It's not a flaw or a fault. Then we get into our attributes and our skills. And the heart of the Era system is a D10 pool. So you're going to add your attribute and your skill together. That's going to tell you how many dice you rolled. And then the game master is going to determine the difficulty. So there will be a target number you're looking to roll equal to or higher in order to achieve successes. And I will get into the actual mechanics of the game when we hit that section, but just want to make sure you're aware of that. So we do have the skills and attributes are broken up into categories. So for attributes, we have potence, strength, intelligence, charisma, defense, stamina, and willpower, reaction, dexterity, wits, and luck. So you're going to have 6, 5, and 4 points to choose which one you're going to put into those categories. So as an example, you could take your 6 points and put them into potence. Now, as far as having attributes of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, because 8 is the highest, you're going to see that those will cost more points in order to achieve. As far as attributes, starting off, you're really not going to have 5s and 6s. As far as skills, that would be possible because with the skills, you get 10, 6, and 4 points. Once again, these are broken up into categories: personal, technical, and interaction. And I'll be honest, if I were going to be running Era Survival, I would probably revamp these skills because there are some skills in here that feel redundant. Well, there are other skills that are not present whatsoever. And these skills are really broad. As an example, technical skills, we've got construction, drive, engineering, explosives, gunnery, and medicine. Really skewing heavily towards combat. And of course, there is scavenging, there is crafting in Era Survival. So I don't think that the skills should skew that heavily towards combat. Just me. Like I said, I would probably rework the skills. We also have derived stats. We do not have experience points. We do have levels. So we have level 1 through 20, but this is designed more as a milestone leveling up system, which I am never a fan of. It's too arbitrary as far as the game master, but I do kind of like the way the characters level up. So at certain levels, they'll get an additional attribute point, and other levels, they'll get skill points. They get more skill points than attribute points. And then on other levels, they'll get to choose a new specialization, which the specialization is a bonus that the character has, something that makes them unique. Next section we get into is all equipment. So we've got weapons and gear, as well as a bestiary. And I thought this is pretty cool. We have different tiers as far as cost. They are not tech levels, but cost. And of course, barter is a big deal in a post-apocalyptic setting. But as I mentioned, I get the impression this is supposed to just be Earth because everything is just regular modern era equipment. We don't have like weird science or high-tech stuff or alien technology. So I think Gaia is simply Earth, and the survivors just simply refer to it as Gaia 100 years on from the outbreak. Then we get into a bestiary and we start getting kind of character sheets, stat blocks for them. And funny enough, we still haven't gotten to the point where we know the rules. So I thought this was really weird. So We do have some cool entries, don't get me wrong. Once again, I think one of the biggest selling points of Era Survival is the setting, is the background, is the factions. I like the various different infected and other creatures. And we have regular, normal animals too in here. But I think it's just bizarre that we get these stat blocks without knowing how they work. It's like, okay. Something that I had noticed is that it's not readily apparent how many dice you roll. And the way I finally figured it out was taking a peek at this character sheet, because we have different pips like we would see in the World of Darkness role-playing games. And the number of pips is going to determine how many dice. So as far as attributes go, everybody starts off with at least one in every attribute, which is going to give them one die. And then with the different skills, you can't have zero. So we have 1, 2, 3 dice, 1, 2, 3 dice. So you're looking at 1 to 6 dice before any kind of modifications, any additional dice or removal of dice because, say, a disadvantage, something like that. But it wasn't laid out in the rules where I understood it. So it was kind of like, really? I will say the way that Era Survival is presented, even though we get all the rules, it's almost presented as if you would already have some foreknowledge of this system, that you have some familiarity with the Era system, which I thought was kind of strange. So we get into the basics. So as I had mentioned before, we've got a dice pool system with 10-sided dice, and we also will have a difficulty target number. So as an example, let's say I am trying to do something and I've got an attribute of 2 that's going to be used with one of the skills I've got, and I've got a 3. So it gives me 5 dice. So I'll be able to roll 5 dice. And as far as the difficulty target number, something that's relatively easy is going to be 2 or 3. Something that's maybe a little bit harder, okay, now we're looking at 4 or 5. Something of moderate complexity, 6 or 7, and so on, up to 10, which would be something very, very difficult. So I'm going to roll my dice. Let's say we've got a difficulty of 7. All right, so I've got 1 7, I've got a 10, and the rest are 6s. So what happens on a 10 is that's an exploding die. So I get to roll another die. And I get a 5. If I had rolled a 1, the 1 would have been a failure. Now, because this is an exploding die, you might think, oh, well, it's kind of like a critical hit, so a 1 must be a critical failure. That is not the case. But what will happen is if you have more failures than you do successes, more 1s than you do successes, then you might have a fumble. And there are examples of different fumbles depending on what was being attempted at the back of the book, which I really like those being included. So what would happen is not only am I looking at having 2 successes, you'll also be looking at the number of successes, right? So got successes, I've got 2 right here. 1-shot rolls, 1 or 2 successes is a minor success. 3 or 4, moderate success. 5 or 6, strong success. 7 or 8, superior success. And then, of course, we have different successes required for something that might be continuous, something that's going to take a bit of time to accomplish. You might have to make more than 1 roll. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But strangely enough, usually with role-playing games that have a dice pool, your target number is always set. It doesn't change. It's just the number of dice will increase or decrease based on the difficulty. Or if you're looking at a game where the target number moves, it changes, usually you have a set number of dice that you're rolling, and your target number is going to be based on the difficulty. I'm kind of surprised for the Era system, we get both. It seems as if it's a little bit of an added level of complexity that I don't think the game necessarily needs. Just wanted to mention that. But for the most part, that is our core mechanic as far as action resolution. Not too difficult to wrap your head around. Now, this is a relatively crunchy system, especially when we get into combat. Because with combat, now we don't only have our dice that we're rolling looking for successes. We also have things like damage threshold, kill threshold. Some weapons, just a hit that exceeds the kill threshold is a one-shot done. I do actually like that because it's modern weapons. You should have that sort of lethality. So we've got that. We've also got target defense and other factors too. We've got a variety of different kinds of combat. We've got unarmed combat. We've got melee combat, ranged combat, thrown weapons. Now, one thing that we will find is when we get into the different kinds of combat, we'll get a breakdown of how that works, and then we'll get a flow chart. I like the fact that we not only get a breakdown here, it's all written out. This is the way that you go about ranged combats. And then we also get these flow charts. I will say, though, myself personally, I find the combat rules to probably be a little more crunchy than I would actually utilize. If you follow the Gaming Gang, you know, as I've gotten older, I've moved away from crunch. Now, I don't like completely rules light, but I think this is maybe a little crunchier than what I'd be looking for. Now, having said that, if you are looking for a post-apocalyptic survival horror role-playing game that has some crunch to the combat, that's got a lot of combat options, you might want to give this a look. Something else that I really love about this book is the Game Master section. So we have a bunch of information about utilizing the setting, creating missions. We have examples of missions, information about creating your campaign, and a lot of page space is devoted to this. So here as an example, we're getting some session advice for a campaign, giving us a mission briefing, the background, what is the mission, and of course includes the various different factions as well. So we really do get a pretty cool pre-constructed campaign for game masters to utilize. And that's how we're going to wrap up the book. We are going to have some examples for using skills. We've got some examples of combat as well as an index. So here's those worked examples. As I mentioned, some playable characters, a glossary, and then our character sheet. So that is a look at Era Survival's core rulebook. Once again, as I mentioned previously, I don't even know if this is available. But I can only share a review of what's been sent to me. So that is what's going on here. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. There are some things about Era Survival's core rulebook that I think are absolutely worth the price of admission alone. And that is the setting information. Love the factions. I think the factions are all very cool. I like the way this parasitic infection isn't just your typical zombie apocalypse, although there are some infected who are like zombies. So you have got that. So I love that. And I absolutely love the Game Master section towards the end. There's a lot of page count devoted to that. I think very, very useful for those who would be looking at creating a campaign. It's got a lot of example missions as well. Really, really nicely done. There are some things that I'm sort of like, okay. I mean, they're fine. I mean, mechanically, I think the game is fine. I would probably strip some things out, like karma. Didn't care for the karma system at all. I would probably tweak the complexity myself personally as far as the game itself. But mechanically, it's pretty solid, I will say. Now, there are some things that I really dislike a lot about this core rulebook. One is the layout. The layout it's not abysmal, but it is certainly not good. And game masters and players are going to find themselves flipping back and forth all throughout the book, trying to figure things out. So the layout itself is not intuitive at all. Now, is that the case with the definitive edition? I do not know. I could have used a lot less of the fiction. I think there is far, far too much page space devoted to the fiction, whereas that information should have been presented as a gazetteer simply because so much of the setting information is being provided through the fiction that it's not that easy to parse for a game master. It would have been far, far easier to be able to access that information in a gazetteer as opposed to reading through all the fiction. Thankfully, the fiction's not god-awful. So it helps that it's not horrible. It's decent. It's pretty decent overall. Lastly, I have to be very honest. I don't see myself running Era Survival as written. And that's mainly mechanically. It's a bit more crunchy than I like as far as role-playing games that I'm going to run. But once again, that is just a personal thing. As I've gotten older, I have less time to game with family and friends. So I like to try to get as much done in a session as possible. I don't necessarily like my combat to run very long. I'm not saying that combat would bog down in Era Survival, but there is quite a bit going on under the hood as far as that mechanically. All right, all in all, I do recommend Era Survival, even though I probably would not run it, especially as written. And I can't tell you if this is the book you can get, but I can tell you can get the definitive edition, and it's got 84 pages more. Don't know exactly what comprises those 84 pages, but it is a bigger book. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Era Survival's core rulebook a 6.5 out of 10. Recommend it. It's not necessarily for me, but there is a lot to like about it. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It will not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.